All right. So this week, we're going to focus all of our attention on the successful completion of creating the texture set for a cool little blacksmith shop sign. Okay. Now this is another asset that I've given you, but if you wanted to model your own, yay, thumbs up for that. I have no problem with that. The goal of this week is to give you as much experience with modeling as you can, or excuse me, with the texturing as you can. So I've given you both the models. I've given you the model for the lab, as you guys have already been working on earlier today, and then I've also given you the model for the homework this week, okay? The big picture idea is that you should be able to include this blacksmith shop sign in the project that we're going to start rolling out next week. Next week, we're going to start building a blacksmith shop in its entirety, so an entire building, if you will, that we're going to be able to walk in, walk around. And we're also going to start talking about how we can incorporate our objects in Unity. So things are going to start to take shape a little bit more next week, and in every sense, we're going to continue to build assets for our final project. So that's the big picture idea behind this. I'm trying to give you another asset that you can use to begin to populate your final project here in a minute. So if you go into the resources section of the web page, you'll find the link to the asset that I've given you. Unlike the lab assignment, you have to make some very specific choices on the UVs, okay? I've made all the UVs for you, so you don't necessarily have to create the UVs, but you do have to figure out their position inside of the positive UV quadrant. So you have to make some decision as to what parts of your object you want to have higher quality and which parts you want lower quality, or maybe have multiple textures to describe all of the details of your blacksmith shop sign, okay? This is it. Let me turn on the rest of the model by hitting the U key. There it is. There's the entire model itself, okay? Everything is UV ready to go, but you need to make some decisions as to how you're going to use these UVs in the positive UV quadrant. So I'll leave that up to you to figure out, okay? For our little purposes this afternoon, I'm going to focus exclusively on the shop sign itself. So I'm not going to really focus on the sign or on the little post that holds the sign to the house or the fence, whatever you want to use it for, okay? As with all things computer graphics, we're forced to make some pretty big decisions, right? After we've created our UVs, we need to begin to conceptualize how we want this texture to look back on the model here in Modo, okay? Now for me, my vision is I want to have this be a wooden blacksmith shop sign, right? And I want to have some sort of logo on the interior, maybe some text on the middle of the sign that says like blacksmith or forge or something. I don't know. We'll figure that out in Photoshop here in a minute. So there's going to be a texture, a wood texture. Then there's going to be some font and some icons that will start rounding out what all this is going to look like. In addition, I also want to have maybe each one of these separate levels, these inset bevel patterns. So all of these guys in here, okay, all these steps, to be a slightly different color. You know, in my imagination, this is going to be kind of like a nice gold. This next one is going to be a nice green. And maybe I'll revisit those colors with the font and the icon that I'm going to use in the center of the blacksmith shop, the blacksmith shop sign, okay? So that's my vision for this. How are we going to execute said vision? Well, if you take a look at what I've done here, I've already gone ahead and created a whole series of material groups that will separate out all of these different elements inside that Surface ID path. So I've already done that. But I want to show you something new, okay? I want to show you something new that I think you guys will enjoy and will help create the textures over in Photoshop. So this is where I am. You can see what I have here. Here's my ambient occlusion pass. It's already on. Of course, I have my layer that's exclusively that exclusively contains all of my UVs. Turn that on and off, okay? And then I have a whole series of folders down here at the bottom that are ultimately going to be masks for solid colors, right? And will help me control the placement and detailing of those portions of my mesh. This we already know. This we've done many times this semester, okay? But now we come into a very large challenge. I have a very big object that I want to place a wood texture over its entirety, right? The entire shop sign is going to be wood. I went on to, I guess we should just call it textures.com now, right? Instead of CG Textures. That's going to take some reprogramming on my part. I've been saying CG Textures for probably 10 years, so saying textures.com is a little odd, all right? So this is a texture that I got from textures.com. And you can see it's a pretty great wood texture. I like this one very much so, okay? However, if we look at the way this texture is being applied and it is working down here in the majority of our shop sign, what does it look like to you guys? What's the big problem visually with this wood texture? It's way too big, right? It's way too big for the area that it's being placed in. This is a consistent challenge that we have in the computer graphics industry, especially when we're kind of laying out all these textures. The details of the photographs don't match the relative size of the object that they're being mapped on. It's very, very difficult, and I mean very difficult, to get a good sense of this in Photoshop, right? Where is it easy to get a good understanding of the size of these images on our models? Back over in Modo, right? Again, we're making a disconnect between Modo and Photoshop. We've already sent this stuff to Photoshop. You've heard me say a number of times, it's a point of no return. Once you send things to Photoshop, you can't go back. Well, you're right, I have said that, but we're going to modify that a little bit, okay? We're going to start creating some additional source elements in Modo that we then can use as texture information again here in Photoshop. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to jump back over into Modo real fast. And you may have already noticed that I have a material group here in my shader tree called wood. Inside of that object, I have a tiling texture, that exact same wood texture that we saw back on our inside of our Photoshop document a minute ago. Let me just go over to textures.com, because this is actually kind of cool. This is the actual file that I downloaded from the website itself. And one of the cool things about textures.com is that it gives you these tiling textures. Now, how would you describe a tiling texture? Repeating, yeah, and when it repeats both horizontally and vertically, do you see the transition line between those repeated tiles? No, it's seamless. Good tiling textures are seamless. Well, check it out. We have a whole bunch of tiling textures. Well, actually, in this one, we only have one. It's the left one. And they've even done us a really great solid by giving us this really great interactive preview. And there it is. Now we can see precisely how this tiling texture is going to look when mapped to our model. Now, just because we don't see the seams, the moment where they tile, doesn't necessarily mean we won't see the features of the image. If you look at this guy, you can clearly see the features of the image repeating both horizontally and vertically, right? So they give and they also take. We have to be kind of careful in this, but it proves to be a really powerful resource for us going forward. Let me show you. We're going to use tiling textures a lot going forward in this class. This is just step one into our process. Because what I want to do is use this tiling texture on my model in Modo. Let's jump back over, and you can actually see that it's placed in there already. Awesome. Now, right now, this wood rough texture is affecting the diffuse color values, which is what I want. And now, on the model, I get a really good sense of how big or small all of the photographic details are on the actual model itself. I can do a very quick glance and see, okay, the wood grain pattern is too big or is too small. I can see that quickly, right? Here in this environment, I can make sweeping changes to this entire object and see them update live in front of me. Same with on the back, okay? Now, I need to throw pretty much everything into that wood material. So I want that same tiling texture to be used on those other insets, okay? Awesome. So we will need to do some adjustments on this, okay? A couple adjustments. Now notice that I have my texture selected inside the shader tree. And if I go into the texture locator section of my properties tab, there's some options in here that we'll definitely want to take a look at. Of course, we're using the UV map projection type. We're grabbing the correct UV map, but check it out. This horizontal and vertical wrap is going to determine the size of this repeating tiling texture on the model itself. And this is where we want to kind of hang out. Now, the default value is 1, and now you can see exactly what we're getting here. A very, very similar result. And let me just do this. Okay, look at the shield, the sign here, and in particular, look at the size of the texture details on the sign. If we were to jump back over into Photoshop, and specifically look at this one over here. Oops, sorry. I'm using the Modo keyboard shortcuts to do my thing here. They look very, very similar. They look wrong. texture details are just way, way, way too big. Back in Modo, though, we can very quickly change the horizontal and vertical wrap to dial in the size of this repeating texture on the model itself. Now, I'm going to do both of these values simultaneously by clicking on this little 0, which enters in a little equal sign on both of those input channels. Now, each one of these is going to get the exact same value when I start dialing it up. I'm going the wrong way. That's interesting, isn't it? Here we go. And now I'm just doing this to taste. I'm trying to figure out which size in here looks good. So this is where I'm doing my art direction. I may think, from this distance, that's kind of maybe what I want, a value of 3.64. This looks appropriate, right? So how do I get this information out of Modo and back onto that layer over in Photoshop? Well, actually, you can't. But I'm going to show you a trick, okay? We're going to take the image that we have in here, and we're going to bake a new file from it. It's going to be pretty rad, okay? We're basically going to use the tiling texture that's being mapped onto this object as an input parameter for a baking operation, okay? This isn't going to be done through a render output. I want to take that image, the one that I have selected in my shader tree, and bake it to my UV map, okay? And I think once you see me do it once, you'll probably go, oh, I get it. This is pretty rad. Let's just do it real fast. It's pretty cool. So I'm going to right-click on this guy. And then what we're going to do, it's way down here at the bottom. Of course, we have bake from object to texture, which we're going to talk more about in detail. But check this out. We're going to go bake to file, okay? Bake to file. Check this action out. This is actually pretty cool. Go bake to file. As one might imagine, you're going to get a standard OS Finder window. So make sure you understand where you're saving all of this stuff. And of course, you need to give it a good name. The default name will actually be bake, but I was pre-flighting this while you guys were working on your lab assignment earlier, and I changed it to test. So let's give it a little bit more of a meaningful name. So here's the naming convention that I'm going to use, and this is just going to be wood grain. All right, and of course the file type itself, I'm a big fan of the PNG file type, but TIFFs and targets will also work. At the very least, we need to ensure that the file format that we choose supports a transparency channel of some kind. Okay, PNGs, TIFFs, and targas are the ones that we want to hang out in. Let's just do it. Let's bake it. Now it's going to ask for a size. Now I'm working off of a 1024 by 1024 texture over in Photoshop. So life is good. We'll just hit OK, and then check it out. Look what it just did. Boop. It baked that image to the UV map, right? It preserved all that wonderful tiling information that we just set up. Now this isn't being evaluated by the lights and the global illumination system. In every sense, it is a representation of the image buffer for the polygons inside of that material group. Okay, so it's just grabbing the texture and all those tiling values, and it's baking it to a texture. This is awesome, right? Does this make sense? You kind of seeing it? So we can set up our tiling textures in Modo, bake it out using that bake to file command, and then use this as that base layer over in Photoshop, right?
What about the black lines in the center thing?
Yeah, no, that's part of it, right? That's actually part of my UV map. You talk about this, Josh, in here? Oh, that's part of my UVs, yeah. Yeah, these UVs are disconnected UV islands, so there's a small little gap between each one of those UV islands, and you're seeing that here. Yep. This is extraordinarily useful because now I can quickly establish that base texture, map the relative size of my images to the size of the object that it's going to be placed onto, and then bake it out into a texture that we can easily integrate into our established Photoshop texturing pipeline. It's awesome. It's awesome, awesome, awesome. I've done this a number of times, and it is fantastic. A great example of where I've used this here recently. Actually, it wasn't recently. It was a couple summers ago. I made that Army Jeep, right? Well, there's a couple of places where there are fabric kind of canvas ropes on the actual Army Jeep itself. I didn't know how big or how small I needed to make the texture to map correctly onto those things. Well, using this process, it took me 2 seconds, and it was done. It was awesome. Okay, this gives us a base texture that we now can use over inside of Photoshop. Okay, So let's go over to Photoshop and start working with this bad boy. Okay, let's hide all of this. Definitely want to hide that. Look, here's the one that I just created a minute ago. Okay, now I'm going to use this as a source element for my texture set that I'm creating over here in Photoshop. Okay, let's drag it into my texture, and now I can start working with it. Okay, so this guy isn't going to go inside one of our folders. Oopsie. Go. We're going to take this one, and we're just going to drag it down here to the bottom because we want it to influence everything, 100% of our image itself. And things are already starting to look good. Okay, wonderful. This is great. This is so fantastic, right? Because now we have texture detail that perfectly matches the size and the proportions that we want back over in Modo. Very quick, very easy. That bake to file command is extraordinarily powerful, especially when it's trying to establish just the base information, because we're going to cover the base information up with a lot of extra details, dirt, grime, whatever. There's a lot of stuff going on in there, okay? All right. So going back to my grand specification, my grand vision of all of this, I believe I wanted in here, in both of these groups, to have some color. So let's throw some color in there. Let's turn the visibility of these groups on. So group 2, let's also add in a solid color. I think this one I want to have it be a nice shade of yellow, kind of gold, maybe a little bit more saturated with color. There we go. The bottom one, I definitely don't want it to be red. In my imagination, when I was prototyping this earlier, I thought maybe a nice shade, a nice dark green would complement that gold quite nicely. So I'm already starting to establish the color palette for my texture. While we're doing it, let's very quickly go in and figure out the text, the logo for my blacksmith shop sign, okay? Maybe we'll just do the logo to keep it easy. And since I'm in a silly mood at the moment, we're going to use some of the really crazy custom shapes that come with Modo or Photoshop. How about, let's do this. Let's have the logo for our blacksmith shop be a foot. There we go. Hammer. Let's do the hammer and the wrench. Okay. Now, at the moment, this is a vector shape, and I think I have it, and I certainly do. Let's get it out of these. Actually, it needs to go into that folder so I can see it. Let's turn that one on. Ha ha ha. There we go. This is very boring. That's okay. Wonderful. Now let's go and change its color a little bit. Maybe experiment. Gold is interesting. Maybe the green. The green makes a little bit more sense to me. Awesome. So I'm being a graphic designer now. And what would happen, let's just experiment. What would happen if I give it a small outline? Whoa, not pink, obviously. Maybe a 1 pixel. Yeah, let's just roll with that. I think that's okay. Now, clearly we have a lot of integration that we still need to do, but this is a step in the right direction. It really is. I'm happy with the direction we're going in all of this. Maybe at the end of the day, what may be better for the graphic design and just the readability of this is to have the wrench and the hammer kind of filled in with the same fill color. That has everything to do with the vector mask, or excuse me, the vector shape layer that I'm using. But, you know, here in Photoshop, we can do anything, right? Totally grabbed the wrong tool there a minute ago. I'm just going to, it is all a hack. It really is. There we go. And now I'm going to create a new solid color from there. There we go. And let's make it the same color green as the other one. There we go. Wonderful. Put it underneath it so we hide. Oops. There we go. Cool. It's actually kind of what I wanted, which is nice. Yeah. I'll do it one more time for this guy over here. In doing so, I hope that you guys understand that sometimes when painting, it's just about getting the result that we're after. There we go. Cool. I like that. That's a little bit more fun than what we had before. And it'll be easier to see what's happening here in a minute. Now I'm going back and forth. But anyways, it's starting to get there. Okay? So how did we integrate some of these values, some of these layers with each other last week? We talked a lot about this. We spent some significant amount of time exploring it. How did we do it? Does anyone remember? How do we blend layers? Because if you look at like this green section out on the outside of my shield down here, it just looks like it's been spray painted green, right? It doesn't look like it's painted wood, right? It's just solid. We've flooded that entire mass with green, but I want to start exposing some of that lovely wood grain texture that we worked so hard in Modo to create. Anyone? Anyone?
Change the effect to overlay.
Yeah, and specifically, blend modes, right? These blend modes are pretty fantastic because now we can start blending layers together, and this is a great place to start. Certain blend modes are going to give you a nice effect, others are not, okay? Experiment, explore, you're in the driver's seat of this entire conversation. For me, overlay is a little too much, right? Let's explore it, let's see what happens. I like it, but it's gone really dark, very dark. Yeah, let's. Yeah, sure, certainly, of course. Let's see, color burn, nope. Darken. Let's try lighten. Go in the opposite direction now. Screen, even worse. Yeah, I'm not digging it. That's not to say that there's not a result in here that's going to give me what I want. Hard light's interesting. Yeah. But I think here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to that masking idea, okay? Because even though hard light is kind of fun, really it doesn't feel as though it's painted wood. It feels as though the wood has just been tinted, okay? We're losing a little bit of that value in there. So what may be more important and what may give us the result that we're after is to work with some masks, right? Let's work with some masks. Let's do this, okay? Just real quickly. I'm going to go in. So all solid colors come with a mask, right? If I solo my base down here, go over to my channel section, and let's do this. I'm going to grab the red one, which is probably going to have the most contrast. And I want to do a levels call on it to make it really contrasty, okay? So very, very intense blacks, very intense whites, okay? Let's just see what that gets us, and then I'm going to load this as a mask. And on my green over here, let's fill. There we go. Now let's look at what we've done. Now on the surface, it's okay. If we were to continue to make some adjustments, maybe let's just invert it. Command-I will invert the masks. It's even worse. I think I actually made it too contrasty initially. What if we start losing some definition? Yeah, I made it too contrasty because it's now just kind of blurring all together here. Yeah. So I made it too contrasty, but we can use these masks to give us a different effect. We shouldn't be exclusively relying on those blend modes to help us establish the blending of all these layers. Now, if I was to go back in and redo this, I wouldn't make this mask as contrasty as it was, okay? And what we're getting here are certain areas where that wood grain pattern is coming through, okay, in its totality, and certain areas where it's green, making it feel like certain areas have been brushed off and weathered and exposed over time, which is exactly what I think we're after in this particular case, okay? Or what my brain is saying that I want. There we go, cool. I'm also going to do a levels call on that base texture. Doing a levels call really takes advantage of the total dynamic range of this object. And you can see that the texture really comes to life a little bit. By bringing in those sliders on the left and right side of our histogram, we're making some pretty amazing stuff. So I do the exact same thing for my gold guy as well. I think just for simplicity's sake, we'll just do a little overlay. Whoa, that's kind of intense. So let's do soft light, kind of break it down a little bit, okay? Okie dokie. So now we have the basic building blocks of all of our pieces, okay? Except for our hammer. Let's do this. I'm not going to do pass through. Let's just do soft light. Yeah. So this is where this is a great example of having of why having those masks will play a big deal here. Let's put this back to pass through. And I want to take all the layers that construct my hammer, throw them into a group so I can mask them individually. Yeah, and let's just use that one more time. I know it's probably not perfect, but you know, we'll just have to work with it. Yeah. Oopsie. There we go. That's a step in the right direction. Okay, kind of step in the right direction. I still have a lot of work in here to do, but we're getting closer and closer and closer to what my creative brain is telling me to go for this object. Now, the rest of the time that we're going to spend today is going to be talking about bump maps. Okay, because now that we're working with more complex textures, we need to start helping our rendering engine create the illusion of height. Okay, of little peaks and valleys on the surface. Let's export this texture. Clearly very unfinished in every single sense. But let's export it back over into Modo and place it on our model and see what the rendering engine is going to create for us. I'm just going to say this is a PNG, so it's nice and portable. Now, back over in Modo, we'll place that new PNG on the actual model itself. So instead of using this tiling texture, let's throw that new image map into the system here. All right. Oops. Probably would help if I had a final color render output, right? There we go. So things are starting to look better, right? Starting to feel a little bit more like kind of maybe the direction we want to go in. But if we look at this, the illusion breaks down pretty quickly, right? Especially when you move, right? Especially when you move. It still looks like just a photograph that's been spray painted onto an object itself. It doesn't have any sort of illusion of height, surface relief, little peaks and valleys. I want the light to create nice little shadows and nice little highlights where they naturally would be created on the object itself. Now, over in the computer graphic industry has standardized around this idea. It's a trick, creating what's called a bump map, and what will ultimately be turned into a normal map next week is a trick. That's all it is. It's an illusion, okay? It's a camera trick. It takes a black and white image, so a grayscale value an image, to help us create this illusion. Let's create that black and white image from our object or from our Photoshop document. So here's the easiest way to do it, right? We're going to talk about optimizations that we can do here in a minute. As we've learned from other moments within inside this class, adjustment layers affect every single object below them inside of the layers palette itself. We can create an adjustment layer down here at the bottom. The yin and the yang symbol allows us to very quickly create, I think I'm just going to do hue saturation. Okay, since it's at the top of my layer stack, It's going to affect everything below it, and I'm just going to remove all the color from it, okay? And let's actually put this above it so it gets the ambient occlusion in there as well. So there it is. That's the easiest way to get a grayscale image. And let's look at its effects. So we'll save as. And let's do this. This is no longer the diffuse map. This is the bump. Let's bring that bump map back over into Modo. Okay. Same process. It's just going to be an image. There it is. Okay. Now, of course, the image goes black and white. Why does the model go black and white in the render? You got it. That image is now overriding the diffuse color values that are being created by the material. So we need to change its effect to, it's under surface shading, bump. Okay? There we go. And this is what it looks like. Not good, huh? Looks a little bumpy, but where you can start to see the illusion unfold in front of us, right? Where let's talk about the illusion itself, okay? Wherever the computer sees black, we're going to create a valley. Wherever the computer sees white, we're going to see a peak, okay? If we were to plot this out on the board, let's just look at it here for a second. It's pretty easy, okay? So a value of black, so 0% color, is going to create a valley. So this is 0 down here. This is 255 or 100% white up here at the top, right? So valley, peak. Okay. Now the areas that will remain untouched would be right here in the middle, right? At about 50% gray. So 50% gray is going to be untouched, okay? Because there's portions of we only really want to create the valleys and the peaks. We don't want to move and shift and create the illusion for all those mid-values in here, okay? So we need to make some adjustments to our layer to really get what we want. If you look carefully here, in my image, we can start to see and maybe get a better understanding of how all this bump technology works. Now, I intentionally left that little white stroke outline on my wrench and my hammer in there so we can see what it's doing, okay? It has a 100% white value in the bump map, right? So what's it created the illusion of? A ridge, a peak, okay, at 255. Now, the areas that are darker are creating little valleys for us. However, we have a ton, and I mean a ton of objects that are middle gray in there, okay, which aren't getting the same, or that are giving us a kind of a false read on what the relief and surface relief of our object should be. Does anyone remember the object in the shader tree that ultimately controls the height of all of this bump effect? I want to lessen it because right now it clearly looks pretty poor, right? It looks like a big hot mess. Where can we go to change the intensity of our bump effect? Bingo. So we have to go to the material that's responsible for that material group. In my case, it's this one right here. If you look at the Properties tab, it is Bump Amplitude. Currently, mine's set to 5 millimeters. Let's just put it down to 1 millimeter and hit the return key, see what we get. Yeah, now it's not nearly as extreme, right? We're still getting those little peaks and valleys. You can kind of see them there. It's going a long, long way of helping us establish the result that we're after. One other thing to note, well, let's turn it on and off so you can see there's the before. Everything kind of looks fuzzy, doesn't it? And then here's with it on. Now that we're, the material, the surface characteristics of this object are also in play here. So we're getting, reflections now, which we should get naturally inside of our environment, okay? In addition, you can also get a much better understanding of this when we render it as well. Let's just render this real quick. The results get a little bit better. I think we have draft previews of all of our bump effects inside the preview window. So when you commit to a full F9 render, you get a much more higher quality representation of this effect. Okay. However, it's cool, but it really doesn't give us the illusion that we're after, right? The illusion that I'm after is that I want to make, excuse me, there we go. I want to make the logo on the top here maybe bump out a little bit more than the rest, okay? Because if you think about it, if we have actually painted a logo, it's going to be, paint has its own defined thickness, if you will. It needs to be bumped out more than the rest of its environment, right? Make sense? Okay. In addition, you can also see that there's some big-time bump errors in here. Let's go back to the preview window. Over here on the sides, we're getting an error. We're getting a growth coming out of the side of our shield here. That's not exactly what I want. And it has everything to do with of how we created our bump map back over in Photoshop. Simply just changing the color and removing the color values from our bump maps is not going to give us the result that we want. We always want to be able to control it, okay? And we can and should control it. Let's go and check it out. Here's what I'm going to do back over in Photoshop. First things first, you're going to save a new version, a separate Photoshop document, because we're going to make some pretty sweeping changes to our texture here. So first things first, File, Save As. Okay, this is no longer source stuff. This is a bump VO1. There we go. All right, so a new version of our Photoshop document, a separate version. The previous one was just the diffuse colors. Now we're working on a Photoshop document where we can go in and begin to monkey and play with all this information to get what we want. Now, keep in mind the rules here. Keep in mind the rules. What we want to have is the illusion of height information based off of these grayscale values. Right now, we have that green solid color layer that's giving us bad bump information for this part of the wood, right? This part is going down, right, because it's darker. So it's being bumped down. Do we want that entire area to be bumped down? No, we just want the wood grain pattern to be bumped down, right? So we need to make some pretty big changes, and this is why we want to separate all this stuff out. For this particular one, let's see. Yeah, just turning that layer off is going to give us what we want, right? Turning that green solid color layer that we were working on before, this guy, turning the visibility of that layer off is going to give us the result that we're after, rock and roll, okay? Now, in addition, let's talk about our logo for a second, which is in this folder, okay? It's currently being masked. Let's turn that mask off, okay? And maybe this is more what we want, right? But are these the colors that we're after? No, it's not the colors that we're after, right? I want my hammer and my wrench to bump out. Currently, they're green, and the saturation of that green is being removed, and the result that we get is like a dark gray. We don't want that. We don't want that, the wrench and the hammer area of our bump map to bump down, right? I want it to bump out. So I need to change the color of those two layers to help me achieve the illusion that we're after. Let's just do it real fast. So I'm just going to change it. Let's see. I could change it to white if I wanted, but I like having that small little ridge go around it. Maybe instead of being pure white for the fill color, what we'll do is like 90% brightness. And FYI, I'm looking right here. Okay. So that's a 90. Okay, so it's just ever so slightly not at the peak, right? Because 100% brightness, 255 instead of our color values, is going to be the peak of our mountain, right? The fill color of my wrench is just going to be ever so slightly down. And then I'll make the stroke outline pure white so it pops a little bit more than the rest of its object. This is also going to get changed into, oops, 90. Come on, fingers. There we go. There we go. That's what I'm after. Aha! Excellent. The last thing that I have to do in here is go in. Oh, there's two things we have to do. I want to look at this base layer, the wood grain layer. And remember the ideas that we're working with here. Black pixels inside of our bump map are going to push down and create valleys. White pixels are going to create peaks. The ones hovering around 50% gray, nothing's going to happen, right? As is at the moment, just looking at the wood grain pattern, what can you tell is going to happen? Or what can you guess is going to happen? What can you guess? Just looking at it, based off of this idea that black pixels are going to create valleys, white pixels will create peaks, everything in the middle of our grayscale spectrum will kind of stay where it is. Do you see a lot of black pixels in here? Yeah? We have some black pixels. Where are those black pixels visually on the wood grain pattern? In the cracks. So that makes sense. Yay, we've mission accomplished on that, right? Because now, where there's a crack, we're going to create a natural shadow. Ha ha ha, right? Excellent. Now, where do we want to have the peaks? Or where should there be peaks? Just in the logo, but we can also have some peaks on. Yeah, so we need to go in and start adjusting the colors of our wood grain pattern. Of course, we want black in all these cracks, right? But maybe we only want to have white in certain areas or light gray in certain areas. A majority of this image should be middle gray, right? With that layer selected, I'll hit Command L. Let's see if we can get what we're after here by just changing this mid value. A little contrast here. There we go. So I get to dial it in. What I'm looking to do here is just only have middle gray. Yes. Now, check it out. That's much. Is just only have middle gray. Yes. Now, check it out. That's much better. Now, maybe it's a little too whitewashed. I went too far with it. Somewhere right around in there. Now we have more colors that are more pixels that are that middle gray, unaffected, right? And then we have some pixels on the wood grain that are white, and then of course we have a lot of pixels that are black, which will represent the peaks, or excuse me, the valleys in the actual wood grain themselves. Okay? Let's take this back over into Modo and see precisely what this has yielded us, what this has created. File save as. I'm going to save it as a PNG one more time. And we're going to get a much different result. Wonderful. Just making sure that the naming convention is all the same. Because since I named it the same as the file that I initially mapped over in Modo, that texture is going to auto-update for us once I hit yes. Aha. Wonderful. Now we're getting a very, very different result. We're getting closer to what we probably should have been creating all along. If you look at what we have here, yeah, you can just barely see that it looks like the logo is popped out a little bit in its entirety, right? Let's turn it on and off. Here's with it off. Here's with it on, right? We're getting valleys just where we have the black pixels on our mesh, or excuse me, on the texture, okay? And then we're getting the illusion that we want in the center. Now, I didn't put the texture in there, so it looks a little too cardboard cut out at the moment, but I did that intentionally so we could see the effect. Can you guys see it? I see it like instantly, but then again, I've been looking at bump effects for a while. It's a much more pleasing and realistic representation of the surface characteristics of this object, okay? Now, you can and you should be able to go in and continue to modify all of your colors inside of Modo, okay? And this is something that you can do in other applications as well, so it's apt given our conversation today. Now, I have my bump map selected, and under the texture layers section, check it out. You can also go in and start changing the colors, which is basically doing a levels call, right? We're making it more or less contrasty, okay? High value, low value. Check it out. You can start increasing this. And now, all of those white values are being pushed further and further to middle gray, okay? We're making it more contrasty, so we can continue to adjust this effect inside of Modo. It's not something that we exclusively do over in Photoshop, okay? It's pretty neat. Me like you very much. And it just gives us that sense of realism pretty quickly, okay? My suggestion to you as you begin to go through this process and create bump maps is to look very carefully at what your bump map is doing. Just don't flip it to a grayscale image and go, I'm done, right? You have to physically go in and do an evaluation as to what those colors or what the effect those colors are producing. Keep in mind our big idea here. Black pixels will create valleys, white pixels will create peaks. The values right around 50% gray aren't going to do anything. They're going to be relatively in the same spot. In addition, you also want to make sure that you spend some time looking at the effects of your bump amplitude. This is something that a lot of people, they just seemingly kind of ignore. But right there at the default value of 5 millimeters, it looks really, 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 really bad, okay? It looks way too contrasty. It doesn't look real at all. Given the size of your, given the parameters of your scene, this is a value that you're going to have to dial in. I thought 1 millimeter looks pretty good. Let's experiment with what some of those other values are going to produce for us. Let's just half it. Let's just do 2.5 millimeters and re-render. Interesting, interesting. You can start getting a good sense of the texture there, right? I like it very much. Okay. Okay. So here's with it really bumpy. Here's with it not so bumpy. And let's do one more render where it's not as bumpy. I think I had 1.1 millimeter. 1.1 millimeter, doesn't make any sense. 1 millimeter. Yeah. Look critically at what the effect is doing for you, and you'll get some pretty good results. What's going on here? Cool. Questions on this idea? Does everyone kind of get the basics understanding of it? Going forward, we're going to be making two different types of textures for all of our homework assignments, both a diffuse texture map and a bump map. This is going to transform again, very soon, into something called a normal map. But the idea is very, very similar. We're extracting height information, surface relief information from a texture or from a piece of geometry. Now here in Modo, because we have such a powerful rendering engine, we can extract this bump information into normal map information as well. And we'll talk about that next week too. Okay? There are other conversion applications. I believe there's actually a way to do it in Photoshop. I know there's a way to do it in the PC version of Photoshop. Let's see. It's a filter. Is it a filter or is it under the 3D? Yeah. Generate normal map. Let's see what happens. Just to give you a preview of next week. Oh, they've changed it in this version of Photoshop. They have definitely changed in this version of Photoshop. They used to just give you a preview of the actual normal map itself and not this crazy mumbo jumbo. This is insane.
Can you change the object to
Cone. No. Oh, texture map down here at the bottom. Let's see. There we go. That's what I'm after. Actually, but it's still doing a very, very poor job. This banding in here is not what we want. but this is the result that we're after. We'll be able to capture this in Modo pretty quickly. Actually, next week, we'll talk a lot about this next week, okay? This is the direction we're going in. The ideas are the same, right? The surface and the height information is going to help us create, or these black and white images are going to help us create that surface and height information. I've actually made a critical error in this. There's one thing that we forgot to deactivate before we sent this all back over into Modo. Did anyone catch my mistake? Oh, no, actually, I was a good boy. You want to make sure that your ambient occlusion is also turned off, because it's going to create dark pixels inside of the bump map that we don't want to have bumped, okay? So just make sure your AO pass is off, and life will be good. Questions on how to work with bump maps. Now, please use the live stream as a resource going forward. But as a reminder, inside the Week 8 section inside of D2L, I've given you just a small little video here that's called Understanding Bump Maps, and it talks about many of the things that we just talked about. So you have a lot of different resources. This isn't anything new in the world of computer graphics. We've been doing this since the 80s, okay? So, and we're going to continue doing it forward because it's a nice, fast way of generating height information. So in addition to creating your blacksmith shop texture, please make sure you spend some time this afternoon and over the course of the next 7 days finishing up your sci-fi panel. Looks like we got about halfway done on that lab assignment, which was about what I expected us to get through today. And of course, your blacksmith shop sign is something that you'll absolutely want to continue to work on over the course of the next 7 days. Now, when you're ready to submit this, please make sure they give me both your Modo project file and then a good portfolio render created in Modo of your texture mapped to your shop sign, okay? You don't need to give me the raw Photoshop document or texture file for this assignment. Question on what the expectations are? Excellent. I'll see you guys next week.